The graduation confrontation. Marcus Thompson adjusted his tie for the third time as he stood outside Lincoln High School's auditorium. The June afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the parking lot, but the heat outside was nothing compared to the burning sensation in his chest. Today was supposed to be one of the proudest days of his life. His son, Jake, was graduating as valedictorian, the first in their family to achieve such an honor. The worn leather of Marcus's work boots clicked against the concrete steps as he approached the entrance. He had worked double shifts at the construction site for weeks to buy the navy suit he wore today. It wasn't expensive, but it was clean and pressed, and it represented every sacrifice he had made to ensure Jake could focus on his studies instead of worrying about bills or groceries. Marcus had raised Jake alone since the boy was 8 years old. Sarah had left them both without warning one rainy Tuesday morning, leaving only a note saying she needed to find herself. Marcus never spoke ill of her in front of Jake, but the abandonment had carved a deep wound in both their hearts. Father and son had become a team, facing every challenge together. As Marcus reached for the auditorium door handle, a firm hand grasped his shoulder. He turned to see Principal Davidson, a tall man with graying temples and an expression that suggested trouble. "Mr. Thompson, I need to speak with you privately," Principal Davidson said, his voice carefully controlled but tense. Marcus felt his stomach drop. "Is Jake okay? Did something happen?" "Jake is fine. He's backstage preparing for his speech. But we have a situation." Principal Davidson glanced around nervously before continuing. "I received a complaint about your attendance today." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. "A complaint? From who? About what?" Principal Davidson shifted uncomfortably. "Mrs. Wellington called this morning. She expressed concerns about having you present during the ceremony. She feels your presence might be disruptive." Marcus knew exactly who Mrs. Wellington was. Margaret Wellington served on the school board and was the mother of Trevor Wellington, Jake's former friend who had fallen behind academically while Jake excelled. The Wellingtons lived in the affluent part of town, in a mansion that could house 6 families like the Thompsons. "Disruptive how?" Marcus asked, his voice steady despite the rage building inside him. "Look, Marcus, I don't agree with this, but she's threatening to pull funding from the school if we don't address her concerns. She says you've been inappropriate at school events, that you don't fit in with the other parents, and that your presence makes other families uncomfortable." Marcus thought back to every school event he had attended. He had always been polite, had always sat quietly in the back, had always made sure his work clothes were as clean as possible. The only time he had spoken up was during a parent-teacher conference when another parent had made a snide comment about Jake's background, suggesting that children from broken homes couldn't be trusted with academic honors. "What exactly did I do that was inappropriate?" Marcus pressed. Principal Davidson looked away. "She mentioned the incident at the science fair last month." Marcus remembered that day vividly. Jake had won first place for his project on renewable energy, beating Trevor Wellington's elaborate but unoriginal display. After the ceremony, Mrs. Wellington had approached Marcus and Jake, suggesting loudly that perhaps the judging had been biased toward charity cases. Marcus had simply told her that Jake's intelligence and hard work spoke for themselves, nothing more. "I defended my son from her insults. That's inappropriate? Marcus, please understand my position here. The Wellington family donates significant money to this school. Without their support, we lose funding for sports programs, arts classes, and technology upgrades. I can't afford to upset them." The betrayal cut deep. Principal Davidson had always been friendly to Marcus, had always praised Jake's achievements, had even recommended Jake for several scholarships. Now he was choosing money over what was right. "So what are you saying exactly?" Marcus asked, though he dreaded the answer. "I'm asking you to consider watching the ceremony from home. We'll live stream it, and you can celebrate with Jake afterward. It's just one day, and it would solve a lot of problems." Marcus looked through the glass doors of the auditorium. Inside, he could see families taking their seats, parents adjusting cameras and checking phones for the perfect angle to capture their children's moment of triumph. He saw fathers in expensive suits consulting their watches, mothers in designer dresses touching up their makeup. These people belonged here in a way that Marcus apparently did not. "My son is the valedictorian," Marcus said quietly. "He earned that honor through years of hard work and dedication. I've been there for every parent-teacher conference, every school play, every science fair. I've volunteered for fundraisers, helped with school maintenance projects on weekends, and donated what little I could when the school needed supplies. I know all of that, and I appreciate everything you've done. But Mrs. Wellington has influence with the entire school board, and she's made it clear that this is non-negotiable." Marcus stared at the man he had once respected. "What would you do if this was your child?" Principal Davidson's shoulders sagged. "I'd probably do exactly what you're thinking of doing right now. But I'm asking you to be the bigger man here. Think about Jake's future. He's been accepted to 3 universities with full scholarships. Don't let one afternoon jeopardize everything he's worked for." The implicit threat was clear. Cause trouble now, and Jake might face consequences later. Marcus realized he was trapped between his own dignity and his son's future. The system that should have protected them was instead using Jake as leverage to keep Marcus in line. "How long do I have to decide?" Marcus asked. "The ceremony starts in 30 minutes. If you're going to leave, it needs to be soon." Marcus looked once more through the glass doors. He spotted Jake's English teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, who had always believed in his son's potential. He saw Coach Miller, who had tried to recruit Jake for the football team before accepting that the boy's passion lay in academics rather than athletics. These people had supported Jake, had seen his worth regardless of his family's financial situation. But he also saw the Wellington family taking their seats in the front row, Mrs. Wellington's perfectly styled blonde hair catching the light as she surveyed the auditorium like a queen reviewing her subjects. Her husband, a prominent lawyer, checked his expensive watch while their son Trevor sulked in his chair, clearly unhappy about attending an event where he wouldn't be the center of attention. Marcus pulled out his phone and stared at the screen, his thumb hovering over Jake's number. How could he explain this to his son? How could he tell the boy he had raised to stand up for what was right that sometimes the right thing wasn't enough? How could he admit that all his lectures about working hard and being a good person meant nothing when faced with money and influence? "I need a minute," Marcus said to Principal Davidson. "Of course. But please think about what's best for Jake." Marcus walked away from the entrance, his mind racing. He thought about all the nights he had helped Jake with homework after coming home exhausted from construction sites. He remembered the pride in Jake's eyes when he had been named valedictorian, how the boy had immediately called to share the news with his father before anyone else. He recalled Jake's speech practices in their small apartment, how nervous and excited the boy had been about addressing his entire graduating class. This wasn't just about Marcus's wounded pride. This was about what kind of man Jake would become, what kind of world they were both willing to accept. If Marcus left now, what lesson would that teach his son? That hard work and integrity were fine until they conflicted with money and power, that some people were simply worth more than others, and that fighting injustice was pointless when the odds were stacked against you. Marcus made his decision. He would not be driven away from his son's moment of triumph. He had earned his place in that auditorium just as much as any other parent, perhaps more so given the sacrifices he had made. Jake deserved to see his father in the audience when he gave his speech, deserved to know that the man who had raised him would fight for what was right, even when it was difficult. He turned back toward the auditorium entrance, his jaw set with determination. Principal Davidson was still standing there, checking his watch anxiously. "I've made my decision," Marcus said firmly. "And I'm going inside to watch my son graduate. Mrs. Wellington's money doesn't give her the right to decide who belongs here and who doesn't. My son earned his place on that stage, and I've earned my place in that audience. Principal Davidson's face fell. Marcus, please reconsider. This could escalate into something much bigger than a graduation ceremony. Then let it escalate. Some things are worth fighting for. Marcus reached for the door handle, his heart pounding but his resolve unwavering. He had no idea that his decision would set in motion a chain of events that would transform not only this graduation ceremony but also challenge the very foundations of power and privilege that had shaped their community for decades. The confrontation escalates. Marcus pushed through the auditorium doors with quiet determination. The familiar buzz of excited conversation filled the air as families found their seats and students lined up backstage for the processional. He scanned the room quickly, looking for an empty chair where he could sit without causing a scene. The auditorium was nearly full, decorated with the school colors of blue and gold. Balloons bobbed from the ends of rows, and someone had hung a banner reading, "Congratulations, Class of 2024" across the back wall. The stage was set with a podium, rows of chairs for the graduates, and a small table holding rolled diplomas tied with ribbon. Marcus spotted an empty seat in the back corner and began making his way toward it. He kept his eyes forward, ignoring the curious glances from other parents who recognized him as the single father who always sat alone at school events. Some nodded politely, others whispered behind their programs. He was 3 rows from his target when Mrs. Wellington's voice cut through the ambient noise like a blade. "Excuse me, sir. I believe you're in the wrong place." Every conversation in the immediate area stopped. Marcus turned to face Margaret Wellington, a woman in her early 50s whose expensive perfume seemed to precede her wherever she went. Her navy dress probably cost more than Marcus made in a month. And her jewelry caught the auditorium lights like small spotlights announcing her presence. "I don't think I am," Marcus replied calmly. "I'm here to watch my son graduate." Mrs. Wellington's smile was as cold as winter moonlight. "I spoke with Principal Davidson about this situation. I believe he explained that your attendance today would be inappropriate." The word inappropriate hung in the air like an accusation. More conversations stopped as parents turned to watch the confrontation. Marcus felt dozens of eyes on him, measuring him, judging him. He was acutely aware of his discount store suit, his calloused hands, the way his hair still showed traces of sawdust despite his careful washing. "Mrs. Wellington, with respect, my son is the valedictorian of this graduating class. I have every right to be here." "Rights?" Mrs. Dada Wellington laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "Let me explain something to you about rights. This school operates on donations and community support. My family has contributed over $50,000 to Lincoln High School in the past 5 years. We've funded the computer lab, the new library wing, and half the scholarships these children receive." Her voice grew louder, ensuring that everyone nearby could hear her words. "Now, I don't expect someone in your circumstances to understand the financial realities of education, but when people like my family invest in a school, we expect certain standards to be maintained." Marcus felt heat rising in his chest, but he kept his voice level. "And what standards would those be? Standards of behavior, of social appropriateness, of ensuring that school events maintain their dignity and proper atmosphere." The accusation was clear even without being stated directly. Marcus didn't belong here because he wasn't wealthy, because he worked with his hands, because he didn't drive the right car or wear the right clothes or live in the right neighborhood. "Mrs. Wellington, I've never caused any trouble at school events. I've always been respectful and supportive." "Respectful?" Her eyebrows arched dramatically. "Was it respectful when you accused the science fair judges of bias? Was it respectful when you challenged my authority as a school board member? Was it respectful when you suggested that my son didn't deserve his academic achievements?" Marcus felt the twisted retelling of events like a slap. That's not what happened. And you know it. I know exactly what happened. I know that you've made several parents uncomfortable with your aggressive behavior and your sense of entitlement. I know that you seem to think your son's modest achievements somehow put you on equal footing with families who have actually contributed to this community. The insult to Jake cut deeper than any personal attack could have. Modest achievements? Jake is the valedictorian. He has a perfect GPA and full scholarships to 3 universities. Mrs. Wellington waved dismissively. Academic performance is only one measure of a student's worth. There are many factors that contribute to a well-rounded education, factors that require financial investment and family connections that some students simply don't have access to. Her meaning was unmistakable. Jake's achievements didn't matter because they came from intelligence and hard work, rather than family wealth and social connections. In her world, merit was secondary to money, and all of Jake's studying and dedication meant nothing compared to the advantages that came with being born into the right family. Principal Davidson appeared at Marcus's elbow, his face flushed with anxiety. "Mr. Thompson, perhaps we could discuss this outside." "There's nothing to discuss," Mrs. Wellington interjected. "I made the situation clear, and he's chosen to ignore reasonable requests for appropriate behavior. I'm calling security." She pulled out her phone with theatrical precision, her manicured fingers dancing over the screen. Marcus realized that she had been planning this confrontation from the moment she saw him enter the building. This wasn't about maintaining standards or protecting other families from discomfort. This was about power, about proving that she could remove anyone who didn't acknowledge her authority. "Mrs. Wellington, please," Principal Davidson pleaded. "Let's not escalate this situation. The ceremony is about to begin." "The ceremony will begin when the appropriate atmosphere has been restored," she replied without looking up from her phone. Marcus looked around the auditorium and saw a mixture of expressions on the faces watching him. Some parents looked uncomfortable with the confrontation, but unwilling to intervene. Others seemed to support Mrs. Wellington's position, nodding approvingly at her actions. A few appeared sympathetic to Marcus's situation, but remained silent, perhaps afraid of drawing Mrs. Wellington's ire themselves. Mrs. S. Rodriguez, Jake's English teacher, caught Marcus's eye from across the room. Her expression was pained, and she started to move in their direction before Principal Davidson shook his head almost imperceptibly, warning her to stay out of the situation. "Security will be here in 5 minutes," Mrs. Wellington announced loudly enough for half the auditorium to hear. "I suggest you leave voluntarily before they arrive. It would be less embarrassing for everyone involved, including your son." The threat was clear. Cause more trouble, and Jake would suffer the embarrassment of watching his father being escorted out by security guards. Marcus felt trapped between his principles and his love for his son. Every instinct told him to fight, to refuse to be intimidated by this woman's money and influence. But Jake's future hung in the balance, and Marcus couldn't bear the thought of ruining his son's graduation day. "Fine," Marcus said quietly. "I'll leave." The victory on Mrs. Wellington's face was unmistakable. She had won, had proven her power, had shown everyone in the auditorium that money could triumph over justice when properly applied. Marcus turned toward the exit, each step feeling like a betrayal of everything he had taught Jake about standing up for what was right. Behind him, he heard Mrs. Wellington's voice addressing the crowd. "I apologize for the disruption, everyone. Sometimes these situations require firm handling to maintain the standards we all expect and deserve." Marcus was halfway to the door when he heard his name being called from backstage. Jake appeared in the wings, still wearing his cap and gown, his valedictorian medal catching the stage lights. The boy's face was a mixture of confusion and concern as he took in the scene before him. "Dad? What's happening? Why are you leaving?" The questions stopped Marcus cold. How could he explain this to his son? How could he tell Jake that he was being forced to leave because someone with money had decided he didn't belong? How could he admit that all his teachings about working hard and being a good person were meaningless when faced with wealth and influence? Mrs. Wellington seized the moment. "Young man, your father was causing a disturbance. He's being asked to leave for the good of the ceremony and the comfort of the other families." Jake looked from Mrs. Wellington to his father, trying to understand what was happening. "Dad, you're not causing any disturbance. You're just sitting here like every other parent." "Sometimes," Mrs. Wellington said with false sweetness, "people don't realize when their behavior is inappropriate. Your father has been asked multiple times to moderate his conduct at school events." Marcus watched his son's face change as he began to understand the situation. Jake had always been perceptive, and he could see through Mrs. Wellington's careful words to the ugly reality beneath. This wasn't about inappropriate behavior or disturbances. This was about class, about money, about keeping people like the Thompsons in their place. "Mrs. Wellington," Jake said carefully, "my father has never been inappropriate at any school event. He's always been respectful and supportive. If he's being asked to leave, it's not because of his behavior." The challenge in Jake's voice surprised everyone, including Marcus. His son had always been polite to authority figures, always careful not to rock the boat. But now Jake was standing up to one of the most powerful people in the school district, risking his own future to defend his father. Mrs. Wellington's mask slipped slightly, revealing the anger beneath her composed exterior. "Young man, I don't think you understand the complexity of this situation. Your father has a history of confrontational behavior that makes other parents uncomfortable." "What other parents?" Jake asked. "Can you name them? Because I've never heard any complaints about my father from anyone except you." The directness of the question caught Mrs. Wellington off guard. She had expected Jake to be embarrassed by his father's presence, to perhaps even support her efforts to remove him. Instead, the boy was challenging her authority and demanding specifics she couldn't provide. Security guards appeared at the auditorium entrance, two large men in uniforms who looked around uncertainly. Mrs. Wellington gestured toward Marcus triumphantly. "Officers, this man is disrupting our graduation ceremony. Please escort him from the building." One of the security guards approached Marcus hesitantly. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to come with me." Marcus looked at his son one last time, memorizing the boy's face, trying to burn this moment into his memory. Jake looked desperate, torn between his respect for authority and his love for his father. "Dad, don't leave," Jake said quietly. "Please don't let them do this to you." Marcus felt his heart breaking. In that moment, he realized that this wasn't just about his own dignity anymore. This was about what kind of man his son would become, what kind of world Jake would inherit. If Marcus left now, he would be teaching Jake that injustice should be accepted, that power and money always won, that fighting for what was right was pointless when the odds were stacked against you. Marcus straightened his shoulders and looked directly at Mrs. Wellington. "I'm not leaving." The words seemed to echo in the suddenly quiet auditorium. Even the security guards paused, sensing that this confrontation was about something much bigger than a simple disruption. Mrs. Wellington's face flushed with anger. "Officers, remove this man immediately. He's trespassing and refusing to leave when asked." Just as the security guards moved toward Marcus, the auditorium doors burst open again. What happened next would change everything, though none of them could have predicted the cavalry that was about to arrive. The unexpected heroes. The auditorium doors opened with such force that they slammed against the walls, creating a sound that cut through every conversation like thunder. 6 men entered in perfect formation, their presence immediately commanding the attention of everyone in the room. They wore dress blue uniforms with ribbons and decorations that spoke of service, sacrifice, and honor. Navy SEALs, their bearing unmistakable even to those unfamiliar with military protocol. The lead man was tall and broad-shouldered, his steel gray hair cut in a precise military style. His uniform bore the insignia of a Master Chief Petty Officer, and his chest was decorated with ribbons that told stories of deployments to places most people only saw on the news. Behind him, 5 other SEALs followed in formation, their eyes scanning the room with the practiced efficiency of men trained to assess threats and protect others. Mrs. Wellington's mouth fell open as she stared at the unexpected arrivals. The security guards stopped in their tracks, suddenly unsure whether they should continue their approach toward Marcus or wait to see what these military men wanted. Principal Davidson looked confused, clearly not expecting any military presence at the graduation ceremony. The Master Chief's eyes swept the auditorium until they found Marcus Thompson standing near the back, flanked by security guards and face down by an angry woman in an expensive dress. Recognition flickered across the military man's face, followed immediately by something that looked like controlled fury. "Marcus Thompson," the Master Chief said, his voice carrying clearly across the auditorium. "It's been too long, my friend." Marcus stared in disbelief at the man approaching him. Slowly, recognition dawned as memories from years past came flooding back. "Chief Ramirez? What are you doing here?" Chief Ramirez smiled, the expression transforming his stern features into something warmer. "Your son sent me a graduation invitation, said he wanted to make sure his father's old friend could be there for his big day. We were in the area for a training exercise, so 6 of us decided to take leave and drive down to see the ceremony." Behind Chief Ramirez, the other SEALs nodded respectfully toward Marcus. One of them, a younger man with lieutenant's bars, stepped forward. "Mr. Thompson, Chief Ramirez has told us a lot about you over the years. It's an honor to finally meet you." Marcus felt overwhelmed by emotion. He had worked construction jobs at various military bases over the years, including a stint at Naval Base Coronado, where he had met Chief Ramirez during a barracks renovation project. The 2 men had bonded over their shared values of hard work and integrity, and Marcus had often provided carpentry work for military families at cost, understanding the financial challenges that came with service life. Mrs. Wellington, however, was not impressed by the military presence. If anything, she seemed annoyed that her moment of triumph was being interrupted. "Excuse me, gentlemen, but we're in the middle of handling a security situation here. This man," she gestured dismissively toward Marcus, "has been asked to leave the premises, and we need to resolve this matter before the ceremony can begin." Chief Ramirez turned his attention to Mrs. Wellington, and she visibly shrank under his steady gaze. When he spoke, his voice was calm but carried an unmistakable note of authority. "Ma'am, I'm not sure what situation you're referring to, but Marcus Thompson is one of the most honorable men I've ever had the privilege to know. If there's a problem here, I suspect it's not with him." Mrs. Wellington's face flushed red. "I don't think you understand the complexity of this situation. This is a private school matter involving inappropriate behavior and community standards." "Community standards," repeated Lieutenant Morrison, the younger SEAL. "That's interesting. In my experience, the most important community standard is treating people with dignity and respect, regardless of their economic circumstances." The other SEALs murmured agreement, their presence forming a protective barrier around Marcus. Mrs. Wellington realized that her carefully orchestrated removal of an unwanted parent had suddenly become a public confrontation with decorated military personnel, and the optics were not in her favor. "I don't appreciate military personnel interfering in civilian matters," she said, trying to regain control of the situation. Chief Ramirez stepped closer to Mrs. Wellington, his voice remaining respectful but firm. "Ma'am, we're not here in any official military capacity. We're here as friends and family, invited guests celebrating a young man's achievement. And from what I'm observing, that young man's father is being harassed for reasons that have nothing to do with his behavior and everything to do with his bank account." Principal Davidson tried to intervene. "Chief, I appreciate your concern, but Mrs. Wellington is a member of our school board, and she has legitimate concerns about maintaining appropriate atmosphere at school events. Petty Officer First Class Rodriguez, one of the SEALs, spoke up. Principal Davidson, I'm curious about these concerns. Could you be more specific about what Mr. Thompson has done that warrants his removal from his son's graduation? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Principal Davidson looked uncomfortable, realizing that he would have to either admit there were no legitimate complaints or reveal the classist nature of Mrs. Wellington's demands. Before he could answer, Jake appeared at his father's side. The young man had left his position with the other graduates and crossed the auditorium to stand with Marcus, still wearing his cap and gown with his valedictorian medal displayed proudly on his chest. "Chief Ramirez," Jake said with a smile that lit up his entire face. "You made it. I wasn't sure if you'd be able to get leave." Chief Ramirez returned the smile and clasped Jake's shoulder. "Wouldn't miss it for the world, son. Your father raised a hell of a young man, and we're all proud to be here for your big day." The interaction revealed something that Mrs. Wellington hadn't counted on. This wasn't just a random appearance by military personnel. These men had a genuine relationship with the Thompson family, had been invited guests who had made a special effort to attend Jake's graduation. Her attempt to portray Marcus as an unwanted disruptor was falling apart in front of the entire auditorium. "Jake," Mrs. Wellington said, her voice taking on a patronizing tone, "you should return to your place with the other graduates. The adults need to resolve this situation." Chief Ramirez's expression hardened. "Ma'am, with respect, Jake is 18 years old and about to receive his diploma. He's an adult, and he has every right to stand with his father." Lieutenant Morrison addressed Jake directly. "Son, Chief Ramirez has told us about your academic achievements and your acceptance to multiple universities with full scholarships. That's outstanding work. Your father should be incredibly proud, and he absolutely belongs here to celebrate with you." Mrs. Wellington realized that her strategy was completely backfiring. Instead of quietly removing an unwanted parent, she was now engaged in a public argument with military personnel who clearly supported Marcus and Jake. Worse, their presence was drawing attention to the real nature of her complaints, making it obvious that this was about class discrimination rather than legitimate behavioral concerns. She tried a different approach. "Gentlemen, I'm sure you understand the importance of order and protocol. This is a formal academic ceremony, and we have standards to maintain." Petty Officer Chen, another SEAL, smiled grimly. "We definitely understand protocol, ma'am, and in our experience, the most important protocol is ensuring that people are treated fairly regardless of their background. Furthermore," added Chief Ramirez, "I've attended dozens of military ceremonies where the protocol is crystal clear. Families are honored guests, and their presence is celebrated, not questioned based on their social status or financial situation." Mrs. Wellington was trapped. She couldn't argue against military personnel supporting a family's right to attend a graduation ceremony without appearing petty and discriminatory. But she also couldn't back down without losing face in front of the community she had worked so hard to dominate. "This is ridiculous," she finally snapped. "I won't be lectured about community standards by people who don't even live here." The comment was a mistake. Chief Ramirez's expression turned cold, and when he spoke, his voice carried the authority of a man who had spent decades leading others in life-and-death situations. "Ma'am, we may not live in this specific community, but we've spent our careers defending the values that make all communities strong. Values like integrity, respect, and standing up for those who can't stand up for themselves, and right now, I'm seeing those values under attack by someone who thinks money gives her the right to determine who belongs and who doesn't." The auditorium had gone completely quiet. Everyone was watching the confrontation, and the tide of opinion was clearly turning against Mrs. Wellington. Parents who had initially supported her were beginning to look uncomfortable, realizing that her actions were making their community look petty and elitist. Mrs. Rodriguez, Jake's English teacher, finally stepped forward. "Mrs. Wellington, I think this has gone far enough. Mr. Thompson has been nothing but supportive of his son and respectful to our school community. Jake is our valedictorian, and his father deserves to be here to celebrate that achievement." Other teachers began nodding in agreement, emboldened by Mrs. Rodriguez's courage and the presence of the military personnel. Coach Miller joined the group. "Marcus has volunteered countless hours helping with school maintenance and fundraising. He's contributed more to this school through his time and effort than most parents contribute through their checkbooks." Mrs. Wellington realized she was losing control of the situation entirely. The community support she had counted on was evaporating, and the presence of the SEALs had transformed her power play into a public relations disaster. Chief Ramirez addressed the entire auditorium, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, we came here today to honor a young man who has achieved something remarkable through hard work, dedication, and the support of a father who has sacrificed everything for his son's future. Jake Thompson represents the best of what America can produce: merit rewarded, effort recognized, and dreams achieved through perseverance." He turned to face Mrs. Wellington directly. "If there are people in this community who think that Marcus Thompson doesn't belong here today, then they fundamentally misunderstand what this country stands for and what these ceremonies are meant to celebrate." Lieutenant Morrison stepped forward. "We've served alongside men and women from every background, every economic situation, every corner of this nation. And we've learned that a person's worth has nothing to do with their bank account and everything to do with their character. Marcus Thompson has more character in his little finger than most people have in their entire bodies." The other SEALs voiced their agreement, and suddenly Mrs. Wellington found herself facing not just military personnel, but a growing coalition of teachers, parents, and community members who were standing up to her bullying behavior. Principal Davidson, seeing which way the wind was blowing, finally found his courage. "Mrs. Wellington, I think it's clear that Mr. Thompson is welcome here. Perhaps we should focus on celebrating our graduates rather than creating unnecessary conflicts." Mrs. Wellington looked around the auditorium, realizing that she had overplayed her hand completely. Her attempt to flex her power had backfired spectacularly, and she was now the one who looked out of place and inappropriate. With as much dignity as she could muster, she gathered her purse and headed for the exit. "This isn't over," she said to no one in particular. Chief Ramirez watched her leave, then turned to Marcus with a smile. "Well, that was more excitement than I expected at a high school graduation." Marcus felt tears in his eyes as he looked at the 6 men who had appeared from nowhere to stand up for him and his son. "I can't believe you all came. Jake never told me he had invited you." Jake grinned. "I wanted it to be a surprise. You always told me about your friends in the military, and when I found Chief Ramirez's contact information in your old files, I thought maybe he could make it. I never expected him to bring the whole team." Lieutenant Morrison laughed. "When Chief told us about the invitation, we all wanted to come. We've heard so many stories about you and Jake over the years, we felt like family already." As the SEALs took their seats in the auditorium, other parents approached Marcus to shake his hand and welcome him. The confrontation with Mrs. Wellington had revealed something important about their community. When forced to choose between money and justice, between power and principles, most people would ultimately do the right thing. The graduation ceremony proceeded as planned, with Jake delivering a valedictorian speech about perseverance, integrity, and the importance of standing up for what's right. As he spoke, he looked directly at his father and the 6 SEALs who had become unexpected heroes in their family's story. The speech received a standing ovation, and when Jake received his diploma, the applause was thunderous. Marcus stood and cheered with tears streaming down his face, surrounded by men who had risked their lives for their country and had traveled hundreds of miles just to support a friend and celebrate a young man's achievements. After the ceremony, as families gathered outside for pictures and celebrations, Chief Ramirez pulled Marcus aside. "You know, Marcus, what happened in there today was about more than just one graduation ceremony. You stood up to a bully who thought money made her untouchable, and your son saw you refuse to be intimidated. That's a lesson worth more than any amount of money she could ever have." Marcus nodded, still processing everything that had happened. "I just wanted Jake to see me fight for what was right, even when it was hard. And he did see that. We all did. And now he knows that when things get tough, there are people who will stand up for what's right, people who understand that a man's worth isn't measured by his wallet, but by his character." As the Thompson family and their military friends headed off to celebrate Jake's graduation, word of the confrontation spread throughout the community. Mrs. Wellington's attempt to use her wealth to bully a working-class father had been witnessed by hundreds of people, many of whom began to question other instances where money and influence had been used to silence dissent or exclude those deemed unworthy. The story became a catalyst for change in their community, leading to new policies ensuring that all families were treated with equal respect at school events, regardless of their economic status. Jake went on to university with full scholarships, eventually becoming a teacher himself, always remembering the day when 6 SEALs taught him that true strength comes from standing up for others who cannot stand up for themselves. Marcus continued working construction, but he also became an advocate for working-class families navigating educational systems designed to favor the wealthy. He never forgot the lesson that sometimes, when you stand up for what's right, help arrives from the most unexpected places. And Chief Ramirez and his team remained close friends with the Thompson family, proving that the bonds forged in service to others create connections that transcend geography, time, and circumstance. They had come to celebrate a graduation, but they had ended up defending something much more important: the principle that in America, everyone deserves dignity and respect, regardless of the size of their bank account or the neighborhood where they live.